The moon hung heavy and low over the village of Itango, bathing the cracked earth and mud huts in a silver glow. Crickets hummed in the tall grass, and the scent of burning wood curled through the air like a spirit seeking home. Children gathered at the heart of the village where a great fire roared within a circle of worn stones, its flames licking the night as if trying to touch the stars. Their eyes wide with expectation, they sat cross-legged, wrapped in thin shawls, faces aglow with firelight and wonder. Old Mzee Baraka, the elder of the village, settled onto his carved stool, a relic older than any child present could remember. His back was curved like the crescent moon above, and his eyes were murky with age, but when he opened his mouth, his voice emerged as smooth and strong as the river after rain. "Ah," he began, rubbing his hands slowly, "you little ones are restless tonight. I can see it in your twitching toes and darting eyes. You want a tale, yes? A tale to twist your sleep and steal your peace." The children giggled nervously, huddling closer together. He leaned in, casting shadows across his face that made his wrinkles look like scars. "But what I will tell you now," he whispered, "is not a tale for the faint-hearted. This is not a song to sing while pounding millet. No. This is a tale with two hearts in one grave." The giggles died. The fire cracked and spat a plume of sparks into the sky. In the old days when the rains knew when to fall and goats spoke to dreams, there lived two sisters, twins. Born under thunder, their cries wove together like braided smoke. They shared a womb, a mind, perhaps even a soul. But even the sun casts two shadows when it meets the earth. What binds can also break. And what dies, does not always stay buried. Baraka's voice deepened, his eyes fixed on the flames, as though he saw a past none of them could imagine. "This story," he said, slowly circling a finger in the dust before him, "has been told by whispers and forgotten by shouts. Because those who speak too loudly of the twins invite something they cannot silence." The children fidgeted. One girl, Asha, tried to laugh but choked on it. "It's just a story, right, Mzee?" she asked, trying to sound bold. Baraka looked at her, the corner of his mouth twitching, though whether it was a smile or something darker was impossible to tell. "Of course, little one. Just a story. Like smoke is just wind made visible." He stared again into the fire. "The earth has teeth, and secrets sink deep into her jaws. Betrayal does not rot like flesh, it grows roots. Roots that claw from beneath, reaching toward justice or vengeance or both." The wind picked up then, rustling the grass in a soft, shivering hush. Somewhere an owl called, sharp and cold. Baraka stood slowly, bones cracking, voice barely above breath now. "And when they knocked from inside," he whispered, turning his back to the fire, "no one dared open the coffin." And with that, the night seemed to listen harder. Nyambura was the kind of woman the earth remembered. Her feet moved like roots, slow and knowing, and every plant in Itango seemed to grow more freely wherever her shadow passed. People said she could speak the language of leaves and ask trees to bend their will. As the village herbalist, her compound was filled with drying herbs hanging from woven rafters, gourds with strange symbols, and smoke that always seemed to spiral toward the sky like a prayer in motion. It was Nyambura who brought rain to a dying harvest with nothing but a song and a bowl of goat's milk. It was she who eased births with the touch of her hand and a whispered chant. Her magic, or what some dared call magic, was older than memory but never questioned aloud. Respect shadowed her like a second skin. When she fell pregnant late in life there was silence, then awe. No man had claimed her as wife, but her belly swelled with purpose. Some said the spirits had visited her. Others whispered that a star fell into her garden one night and took the shape of a man only she could see. Nyambura never explained. She simply smiled and kept preparing tinctures, her eyes full of things unsaid. The night her daughters were born, the sky split. Thunder cracked so loud it rattled the clay pots in distant huts, and lightning jagged across the heavens like the finger of a god carving a path. The rain did not fall straight, it spun, danced, coiled. Elders remembered it clearly. That night, they'd murmur, lightning did not strike. It danced. Two girls were born minutes apart but not in the same silence. The first, Aking, slipped into the world laughing, a gurgling, gasping laugh that shocked the midwives. Her eyes wide as though she recognized the faces around her. The second, Adambo, came with fists clenched and silence in her lungs, until she opened her mouth to scream, and scream she did as if rejecting the world itself. Nyambura named them after the weather. Aking, the one who comes in the daylight, and Adambo, the one born after sunset. Day and night. Light and shadow. They grew together, one never far from the other. Aking was all soft giggles and intuition, the kind of child who would pause and say, "Mama, the river feels sad today," only for a flood to follow days later. Adambo was a rock, stern, skeptical, always watching. She questioned everything. If a bird flew strangely, she demanded why. If a goat gave birth early, she took notes. The world hides its truths, she often said, but I will uncover them. They shared dreams. Not just girlish secrets but visions, clear, unsettling ones. They'd wake in the night at the same moment and describe the same dream. A woman with no eyes weaving a basket of teeth, a tree that bled when touched. Nyambura never silenced them. Instead, she listened, nodded, and sometimes added more herbs to their morning porridge. The village of Itango loved and feared the twins. In Itango, twins were both a blessing and a warning. They were said to be born with one soul split in two, destined to either save or doom those around them. When twins laughed, rain came. When twins wept, someone died. They were watched closely, given no room for mischief or mistakes. Every step they took was seen as a sign. But life for a time moved gently. The girls grew into strong young women. Aking took up storytelling, her words rich and textured, pulling listeners into other worlds. Adambo followed her mother's path, apprenticing in the herbal hut, decoding the medicine hidden in bark and root. Then came the still morning. It was Aking who found her. Nyambura lay motionless among her herbs, eyes closed, lips parted as if mid-prayer. There was no blood, no sign of struggle. Only her body, folded peacefully, and the strange symbol drawn in ash beside her. A circle with two curved lines, one inside the other, like a serpent eating its tail. The village mourned with caution. A woman like Nyambura did not die easily. There was talk, of course. Murmurs of curses, revenge from jealous spirits, or the price of knowing too much. The elders performed rites, poured libations, even called the wandering seer from the hills. But no answer came. The air felt heavier. Birds stopped singing at dawn. The wind lingered like a guest that refused to leave. Aking wept openly, her cries raw and unfiltered. She wandered the compound, touching her mother's tools, whispering her name to the walls. Adambo, however, grew quiet. She spent long hours sitting where her mother died, staring at the ashes, at the symbol no one could explain. "We are missing something," she muttered to Aking one night. "Mama didn't just die. She was taken." "Taken by who?" Aking asked, trembling. "That's what I intend to find out," Adambo replied. But the weeks passed and grief settled like dust on everything. Aking returned to her stories, though they had grown darker. Adambo kept searching, books, dreams, omens. Still nothing surfaced. And then one dusk, as the sun bled into the horizon and the trees cast long shadows toward the village, a stranger arrived in Itango. A man with a walking staff carved like a serpent, his eyes hidden under the brim of a wide hat. He did not knock. He did not speak at first. But he walked straight into Nyambura's old compound, as though he had always belonged. No one knew his name then. No one knew that he would be the beginning of the end. The stranger called himself Kanga, and when he arrived in Itango, it was as though a wind from another world had crossed the threshold. He came just as the dry season had hardened the soil and cracked the riverbed, and the people were more open to distraction than they cared to admit. He wore a long dust-colored robe and a hat that shaded most of his face. His voice was low, pleasant, even melodic, but never rose above what was necessary. He said little unless asked, and even then he answered with riddles that left listeners wondering if they had understood it all. "I am the echo of one lost long ago," he said when asked who he was. "Nyambura knew my voice before she knew her own." He claimed to have been her lover before she was ever with child. That they were separated by fate, not by choice. That he had been searching for her all this time, only to arrive and find her dead. Itango's elders frowned. No one had ever heard of such a man. Nyambura never spoke of love, not even in the years before her pregnancy. But he said it so convincingly, with grief in his eyes and a hollow ache in his voice, that doubt began to crumble like old stone. Kanga took up residence in Nyambura's old hut, which had stood empty since her passing. The herbs still hung from the rafters. The ashes of her fire still clung to the hearth. He claimed he wanted to honor her memory, to keep her craft alive. He began mixing concoctions, performing small healings, always quietly, always alone. And strangely, though none liked to admit it, his charms worked. Children who could not sleep found rest under his touch. Men with aching bones walked easier after his tease. Women whispered that his hands could draw pain out of the skin like a thorn. Soon some began to trust him. Even like him. He was clever, patient, and always knew the right thing to say, or not to say. But there was something wrong beneath it all. A silence that stretched too long between his words. a stillness to his presence like breath held for too long. He married quickly, too quickly. It was Adambo who first refused, her mouth a thin line of mistrust. But Aking, still swimming in grief, seemed pulled to him. Perhaps it was the way he said her mother's name, as though holding a delicate bowl between his teeth. Perhaps it was the way he looked at her, not with love but with a knowing that mimicked it. And so, when he asked to stay not as a guest but as a father, and laid his offerings before the elders, Aking did not stop him. Neither did the elders. Adambo stood apart, arms crossed, jaw clenched. "You're letting a shadow into our home," she told her sister. But Aking just shook her head. "Mama is gone. Maybe he can help us understand why." From the start, Kanga moved like someone half-present. He wandered at night, muttering under his breath in a language that turned cold in the air. He avoided mirrors, even water when it stilled. If asked why, he would smile and say, "Some reflections aren't worth seeing." The children of the village grew afraid of him. They said he walked without making a sound. That sometimes they saw his shadow move even when he stood still. It was Aking who first heard it. "Kanga talks to his own shadow," she whispered to Adambo one evening, her voice tight with confusion. "I saw him crouched by the fire." He was whispering, and something whispered back. Adambo's eyes darkened. He should not be here. But the village, for all its unease, remained mostly silent. It was easier to let strange things lie buried. Easier to believe in half-truths than risk digging up what should stay hidden. The twins were no longer girls, and the village no longer treated them like children. Aking tried to trust, to let herself believe in the comfort Kanga offered. He was not cruel, not yet. But his eyes lingered too long on old things, and when he touched the walls of the house, Aking could swear she heard her mother's name carried on the wind like a plea. Kanga avoided Adambo altogether. He looked at her as though she were not quite human, as though he could see something inside her he did not like. She, in turn, stared at him like she was waiting for him to open his mouth and finally tell the truth. And then came the whispering. Soft, low voices from Nyambura's hut at night. A flicker of movement against the walls when no one else was there. A strange chill that clung to the girls when they passed the doorway. The villagers began to speak again, quietly, always behind hands. "Kanga," they said, "his shadow is not loyal to him." Some even began to call him Kanga the Shadow Walker, half in jest, half in fear. But none dared challenge him directly. After all, Nyambura had chosen solitude. She had chosen silence. Perhaps her lover was meant to carry on the same tradition. But Adambo knew better. Shadows do not walk unless they are called. And someone, something, was calling from beneath the surface of their world. It began with a sound, barely a breath of wind rustling through the banana leaves behind the compound. Adambo had followed Kanga into the forest that evening. She didn't say why, only that he had slipped away after dusk, and she could no longer ignore the way the air bent around him when he walked. She had watched him for weeks. His pacing. His whispered prayers to things unseen. The marks he drew into the earth when he thought no one watched. Shapes like teeth, like eyes, like doors. She told Aking she would return by moonrise. She did not. At first light, they found her lying near the base of the fig tree that marked the forest's threshold. Her body curled like a comma in the soil, her skin a brittle gray, lips cracked like old pottery. Her breath came thin as thread, her fingers curled toward her chest as though holding something that was no longer there. They brought her home, and for 2 days she hovered between waking and sleep, speaking only once. Aking sat beside her, pressing cold cloths to her sister's brow, trying to draw her back with old stories, old laughter. Then, on the second night, Adambo opened her eyes. They were clouded and distant, as though some veil had been drawn between her and the world. She gripped her sister's hand with surprising strength. "Aking," she whispered, "the forest, it does not echo anymore." The words made no sense, yet they carried the weight of prophecy. Then her grip loosened. Her body exhaled one last breath and fell still. The wails of morning rose before dawn. But Aking did not wail. She sat by her sister's body, silent, her face as unreadable as the sky before a storm. The village moved around her, performing the rituals, washing the body, whispering prayers to the ancestors. But her eyes never left the bruised hollow of her sister's throat, where something dark curled beneath the skin like a fingerprint burned too deep. Kanga stood apart during the morning, his face hidden in shadow. He did not cry. He did not speak. When Aking asked where he had gone the night Adambo followed him, he only tilted his head and said, "The forest is a place of forgetting. I went to forget. I do not remember who followed." She stepped toward him then, fists clenched, but the elders intervened. "Grief has clouded your thoughts," they said. "Do not accuse a man without proof. Kanga is strange, yes, but he is our kin now. Let your sister rest." Aking turned her back on them all. The village elders, uneasy with the way Adambo died, without mark or wound but empty, drained, chose an old rite to protect the living. They commissioned a ceremonial coffin, carved from a solid block of ebony. Ebony was sacred, rare, and said to bind the soul more tightly than rope or earth. Few were ever buried in such wood. It was a box for dangerous spirits, the kind that might return. The coffin was heavy, dark as midnight, carved with sigils older than even Baraka's stories. No one spoke openly about it, but the message was clear. Adambo's death was unnatural. Her rest must be secured. As they prepared her body, Aking braided her sister's hair with red thread and placed a single blue bead into her palm, something they had once found by the river as children and declared a sign from the spirits. Her tears came in silence now, not as storms but as a quiet rain no one could hear. Kanga offered no comfort. He watched the proceedings from beneath his hat, his expression still and unreadable. At moments, Aking thought his lips moved, mouthing words in a language she could not name. At dusk, the coffin was placed in the village square for the final blessing. Mzee Baraka stood before it, chanting in the old tongue, burning sweetgrass and waving feathers soaked in oil. Children watched from behind their mothers, eyes wide, whispers trembling from mouth to ear. When the lid was finally lowered onto the ebony coffin, 6 men moved to seal it with iron clasps, 3 on each side. The final clasp clicked into place just as the last light of the sun slipped behind the hills. That's when it happened. A sound, soft, faint, knock. The men froze. So did the elders. Aking's heart leapt into her throat. It was unmistakable. A small, rhythmic knock from inside the coffin. What? Then silence. Mzee Baraka paled. One of the men stepped back, crossing himself in 3 directions. A woman gasped. But before anyone could speak, the wind picked up sharply, howling through the trees and lifting dust from the earth in spiraling gusts. "It is just the wind," one of the elders said quickly, too quickly. "Ebony shifts as it seals. The dead do not knock." No one argued. No one moved to open it. Instead, they dug the grave deeper than usual. 6 feet, then 7. Then a final shovelful for good measure. The coffin was lowered with ropes and the dirt packed tight above it. Stones were laid over the grave. Salt sprinkled. Prayers whispered. And that night Itango was silent. No laughter. No music. No dreams. Only Aking lay awake listening. Not to the wind, not to the trees, but to the memory of her sister's final words. The forest does not echo anymore. And in that silence she began to understand that something terrible had been loosed. Something that wore the skin of grief but carried the scent of rot. Something that knocked from within. The night of the burial was like no other Itango had ever known. Moonlight spilled like silver milk across the earth, lighting paths that were never meant to be walked after sundown. Shadows clung to the trees with a nervous hush, and even the crickets dared not sing. Tradition in Itango demanded burials at sunrise, the moment when light chased away the spirits that lurked in the dark corners of the world. The dead were meant to be surrendered to the ancestors as the sun rose, a clean offering in the arms of daylight. But Kanga had stepped forward the morning after Adambo's death, voice calm but firm. "She must be buried by moonlight," he said, eyes fixed on the horizon. "The veil is thinner then. Her spirit will pass more cleanly." There was resistance at first. Whispers. Murmurs. The elders frowned, exchanged uneasy glances. But Kanga was insistent. He invoked rites older than the village itself. Names none dared speak. The way he said them made the air grow heavy. He claimed the coffin's ebony would hold Adambo's spirit fast, but only if buried during the moon's zenith. "She walked close to the other side," he murmured. "To bury her at dawn would leave doors open." And so, for the first time in remembered history, a burial took place beneath the full moon. Aking watched in silence, her face waxen in the pale light, her body stiff with something deeper than grief. She clutched the blue bead she had placed in her sister's hand, thumb rubbing it smooth. Kanga led the procession, carrying a twisted staff topped with a knotted cord of white feathers. He muttered under his breath, words thick with rhythm but absent of meaning. At the grave, he drew a circle of ash around the pit. Then he spat into each corner of the hole before the coffin was lowered. The villagers watched, tense and uncertain, but none dared question him now. Something about Kanga had shifted since Adambo's death. His eyes, once merely strange, now held a kind of emptiness, like looking through a mask into a deeper, darker face that waited behind. As the last of the soil fell and the stones were laid once more, Kanga stepped forward and pressed his palm to the grave. He whispered one final word, too soft to be heard, and turned away without looking back. The night closed behind them like a curtain. Days passed, but peace did not return. It was Aking who first heard the knock again. She had not slept properly since the burial. Dreams came in fragments, twisted vines, teeth sewn into skin, a heartbeat echoing beneath the floor of her room. She wandered the compound at night, checking doors, murmuring her sister's name as though it might answer back. Then, on the third night, she sat by the fire long after the others had gone to bed, eyes wide and dry. The coals glowed like eyes in the ash. Knock. It came from the ground. Not near her. Distant. A single, measured sound, like a fist knocking on a door no one could find. She froze. Her hands trembled. Knock. She stood slowly barefoot and walked outside. The moon was thin now, a ghost's grin. She moved without thought, her body drawn as if by a string. She didn't remember walking to the grave. Only that she stood there, barefoot in the dew, staring down at the stone-covered mound. Her lips moved. She heard herself say, "We are not apart." And then she was back in her bed. At first light, a boy ran to his mother, crying that he had seen Aking in the dark, standing by the grave and whispering to herself. She was singing to the ground, he sobbed, like it was listening. The villagers began to whisper again. She walks with the dead. She's touched. She grieves too deeply. But Aking knew it wasn't madness. She could feel something moving. Some thread that hadn't been cut properly. Her sister's absence didn't feel complete. It felt wrong, unfinished, like a book missing its last page. She began to keep vigil at the edge of the graveyard. She would sit on a stone near the boundary trees, watching the mound, listening. Sometimes she thought she heard weeping. Other times, laughter. But always the knock. Not every night. But often enough to steal her sleep, her hunger, her peace. Kanga grew restless. He still performed small rites in the village, but his presence felt thinner now, more like smoke than man. He barely ate. His skin had taken on a dull sheen, and his eyes darted more often, avoiding even moonlight. He began to avoid Aking entirely. She confronted him once, demanding to know what he had done. "You were in the forest," she said, "and she followed you. What did she see? What did you show her?" But Kanga only smiled, tight-lipped, almost sad. "The dead sometimes die twice," he said softly. "The second time when we let them go." "She is not gone," Aking replied, her voice shaking. "She knocks." That word made his smile vanish. His gaze turned hard. "Then stop listening," he snapped. But Aking couldn't. She wouldn't. Something waited beneath that soil. Not just her sister's bones. There was a truth buried there, wrapped in silence and bound by ash. A lie that walked on 2 feet and spoke with a serpent's tongue. And every night, that truth tried to claw its way back. "You said." The morning Aking disappeared, the sky was gray with a kind of stillness that warned of coming storms. It was the old woman who sold dried peppers who first noticed. Aking hadn't come to the market. Her absence was strange, not loud but wrong, like a bird missing from a familiar song. When the whisper reached Kanga's ears, he didn't seem surprised. "She ran into the forest," he said, calmly sipping from a cup of clove tea. Grief can make the mind run ahead of the body. No one questioned him aloud. But eyes shifted, nervous and watching. Children clung to their mothers. Aking was no longer just the sister of the dead. She had become part of something more, something the village couldn't name. That night, the elder gravedigger, Mzi Abura, went to the burial ground. He had spent decades among the dead and feared nothing in the dark. But as he walked the path past the ebony coffin's grave, he paused. Something was wrong. The stones had shifted. Not much, just slightly, as though the ground had exhaled. Abura stooped low, pressing his ear to the dirt. No sound. But he smelled it, life and rot mingled. A strange heat. He felt the pulse of something that should not have been moving. The next day he told the village elder. Baraka nodded but said nothing. Far from the village, beneath the earth and shadow, Aking awoke. It was not a waking like other wakings. Not from sleep. Not from dreams. It was as if her soul had been poured back into her body like water into a vessel it had once known but forgotten. Her breath came in gasps, the air too thick, her arms pinned at her sides. Wood pressed against her chest, her knees, her forehead. And then, skin. Not her own. Cold. Familiar. She couldn't scream, not at first. The air was too thin, her lungs too weak. She writhed, kicking her heels against the walls, pressing her palms against the lid. The dark was a living thing, wrapping itself around her ribs, whispering nonsense into her ears. Then, something touched her cheek. A hand. Cold, stiff, but moving. And then a voice. You came back to me. She froze. Her heart thrashed. She could feel the shape of her sister's face now beside her, unmoving yet whispering. The same braid she'd woven, the same blue bead still clutched in Adambo's fist. How could she speak? How could she be preserved? Memories began to return, not in sequence but in flashes. The hands that grabbed her from behind. The pressure against her throat. Kanga's face above her, whispering, You hear her too much. A needle. A cloth. Darkness. He had not buried her in the forest. He had not let her run. He had sealed her in with her sister's corpse. And yet, Adambo wasn't cold anymore. Her limbs no longer rigid. Her fingers no longer dead. They moved. We are not apart, the voice whispered again. It came from everywhere and nowhere like the walls themselves breathed it. Aking whimpered. The coffin was too small. Her shoulder pressed to bone. Her legs tangled with those of the dead. But it was not only fear that gripped her now. It was memory. She remembered their games as children. The secret knocks they would use when hiding from Nyambura. 3 soft taps, then a pause. That was their code. That was how Adambo had knocked. And the nights Aking heard it? She had thought it was madness. But it had been a message. Adambo had never truly died. Not completely. Her spirit had clung, buried in the wood in silence, knocking for her other half. And now that half had returned. The coffin shifted. Not much. A groan of wood. Then the pressure of a hand against Aking's arm. A breath, faint, warm. Adambo. But not as she had been. Aking turned her head, eyes wide in the dark, and saw a shape begin to glow. Not with light but with memory. Her sister's features emerging like a dream remembered after years of forgetting. You always knew he was wrong, Adambo said, and her voice was both hers and not hers, deeper, layered with something else. I'm not dead, Aking managed, voice cracking. You were always part of this, her sister replied. We were made together. Born beneath thunder. Remember? And Aking did. The storm that split the tree outside the hut the night they were born. The midwife who screamed when she saw their umbilical cords braided together like vines. The old man who warned Nyambura, these are not ordinary girls. They share more than blood. Nyambura had kept them hidden, protected. She had known. She had whispered charms over their cribs, spoken to mirrors. And now Aking understood why. They were not meant to live fully apart. When one died, the other was tethered. Grief had not driven Aking mad. It had woken something dormant. And now, sealed in ebony in silence with her sister, she began to change. Time slipped. The coffin grew wider, or she shrank. She could feel her sister's thoughts as if they were her own. Memories exchanged like breath. And slowly, gently they began to move together. 2 hearts. 1 pulse. The sound echoed faintly against the wood. Knock. Knock. Pause. Knock. Outside, the grave rippled again. Below, the coffin hummed with memory, with power. With return. And Kanga in his sleep woke screaming. Because he, too, remembered now. He had buried not just 2 girls, but a bond stronger than death. A cord that thunder had tried to break but failed. And somewhere deep in the soil of Itango, something whispered between lips warm again. We are not apart. We were never apart. And the coffin answered back with another soft knock. The first night, it was just a sound, soft, uncertain, like someone tapping on a hollow log deep beneath the roots of the village. Most thought it was a dream, a trick of the wind, or a restless rodent clawing at the floorboards. But the next night it came again, stronger. And then again. And again. The knocking had rhythm. Not chaotic or wild, but deliberate, like a signal trying to make itself understood. 1 knock. Pause. 2 more. Pause. Then 3, slow and heavy. At first, only the elders noticed. They awoke in their beds, blankets pulled up to their necks, the hairs on their arms stiff with fear. Then came the animals. Goats brayed all night. The dogs whined and scratched at doors. Chickens laid no eggs. And each time the knocking began, the village drums, once so constant at dusk, fell silent as if even their rhythm had bowed to something older, deeper. The children cried in their sleep. Some clung to their mothers and whispered of dreams filled with roots and shadows. Of 2 girls with empty eyes knocking on wood from the wrong side. None said it aloud, but the entire village began to feel it. Something was returning. Old Mshale, the seer who had not left his hut in 7 seasons, emerged on the 4th day. His dreadlocks were wound into ropes thick as vines, and his eyes were veiled with cataracts, but his voice still carried the weight of thunder. He hobbled to the fire circle, staff tapping, and the villagers gathered as they had not done since Nyambura's death. "I told her," Mshale said, pointing a trembling finger at no one and everyone. "I told Nyambura not to hide them. But she was stubborn. Brave but stubborn." Someone dared ask, "Hide who?" "The twins of thunder," he rasped. "Born not just of blood, but of storm. Their souls are mirrors. What one sees the other dreams. What one feels the other bleeds." The crowd went still. He went on, voice rising like wind over dry leaves. "In old stories, twins like these were gifts, but dangerous ones. If wrongfully torn apart, they knock. Not to return, but for justice." Kanga was not there. He had vanished the day Aking disappeared. Mshale's eyes rolled white and he added, "The knocks will grow. They will rise like drums of the dead. Until what was buried is unearthed, not the bodies but the truth." That night the knocking began earlier. Louder. It echoed through the ground itself, through cooking pots, through stools, through the wooden beams of huts. A rhythm that no one had taught but everyone knew. The elders called a meeting. Something had to be done. It was Abura, the grave digger, who spoke with the finality of someone who had walked the line between soil and spirit too many times. "We must open the grave." So, the next morning, with hesitant hands and sweating brows, the men returned to the resting place of the ebony coffin. The mound had shifted more. Cracks had formed in the stone ring. Vines, though trimmed days ago, had regrown, twisting like they were drawn to the grave's heart. They dug. The earth came up wet, heavy. The scent that rose was not decay but something older, like thunder trapped in clay. When they reached the coffin, the wood was unmarred on the outside. Still deep black, still sealed. But when they pried the lid off, every breath paused. Inside the girls lay side by side. But not as corpses. Their bodies had not decayed. Aking's eyes were half open, her lips slightly parted as if still in mid-breath. Adambo's hand lay across her sister's chest, palm flat, protective. The blue beads still nestled between their palms. And then someone noticed. Scratches. Dozens. Hundreds. The inside of the lid was etched with desperate claw marks. 2 sets, one larger, one smaller. A spiral of panic pressed into the grain of the wood. Abura wept quietly. Mshale whispered, "They woke together." No one spoke. No one dared to. Then a boy screamed, pointing at the coffin's edge. 3 long scrapes, fresh, not dusty, ran from the head of the box to the foot. They had not been there before. And then, a sound. All froze. Knock. But it did not come from the coffin. It came from the earth behind them. They turned in unison, hearts thundering like hooves. Another knock. And then a third, deep, echoing like it had come from the very heart of the land. The village elder dropped his staff. Mshale raised both arms, eyes wild. "They are not done." Panic swept through the crowd, but beneath it, something else stirred. Not fear. Reckoning. Whatever had been hidden, whatever betrayal had sealed those girls into the darkness together, it was no longer content to remain beneath the soil. Justice was walking the land again. And it knocked in twos. By morning, the village was filled with the hush of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. Word spread quickly. The coffin, once buried deep in the breast of Itango's soil, was no longer sealed. When the elder and Abura returned at sunrise to see if the lid had shifted again, they found it open, completely, cleanly. No force had broken it. The wood lay unmarred, the hinges unstressed. It was as if the coffin had opened itself in the night, inviting its occupants to rise. But there were no bodies inside. No blood. No bones. Just the faint scent of jasmine and charcoal. And in the middle of the empty space, pressed into the smooth ebony floor, was a pattern. 2 mirrored handprints burned into the wood. One left, one right. One from each twin. The village held its breath. And Kanga began to unravel. He had been hiding, sleeping in the empty granary by the edge of the forest, surrounded by salt circles and dried goat tongues nailed to the door. When the news of the open coffin reached him, he did not speak. He only stared at the fire, lips dry, eyes twitching. Then came the knocking, on the walls. He screamed, swearing it was rats, then spirits, then thunder trapped in the roof. But no one else heard it. And soon it wasn't just the knocking. It was the shadows. He began to see them everywhere. At first, it was his own shadow behaving oddly, lagging behind, refusing to mimic his gestures. Then came the second one, always beside him, just behind. matching every move until it didn't, until it turned to look at him while he was looking forward. He began to shout at it, throw stones at it. Elders caught him cursing at the ground, clawing at his feet as if trying to peel his shadow from the earth. He stopped sleeping. Then he stopped eating. Children, bold in the recklessness of youth, followed him once, whispering about his madness. They saw him standing at the edge of the river, hands over his ears, muttering, two shadows where there should be one." On the seventh night, during a thunderless dawn, he ran through the center of the village, robes flapping, hair unkempt, screaming about voices beneath the roots, about sisters walking on water, about forgiveness that never comes. No one followed. The forest swallowed him as if it had been waiting. They found his cloak 3 days later, snagged on a branch deep in the thickets, torn and smeared with something that might have been blood, or might have been sap. No one ever found his body. No one ever found his soul. But 2 days after that, just before sunrise, something else was seen. By the old fishing bend, where the river curls like a sleeping snake, the mist hung low and silver. A herdsman named Juma, leading his cattle early, was the first to see them. 2 figures walking slowly along the riverbank. Girls, young women, side by side, their long braids swinging gently, identical in height and step. One wore a blue sash, the other a white cloth with red embroidery. Their hands did not touch, but they moved in perfect rhythm, like 2 sides of one breath. Juma stopped, heart stuttering in his chest. He called out softly. No reply. He moved closer. Still they walked, feet brushing against the dew-covered reeds. When he was near enough to see their shoulders, he stopped. He could see the faint impression of fingerprints on one's arm, as if someone had once gripped her tightly long ago. He dared to step closer still. Aking, he called. Adambo. They turned at once, but only halfway. From that angle he saw just enough. One had her head tilted slightly, the other's hand reaching back for something unseen. And then they vanished. Not like smoke. Not like ghosts. They were there and then they were not. No splash. No running. Just gone. Juma dropped his staff. He knelt in the riverbank grass, hands shaking. By the time the sun rose, the dew was gone and so were the girls. But the village changed after that. The drums began again, but softer, slower, like mourning songs that had found rhythm in remembrance. Children stopped crying at night. And the knocking ceased. Mshale declared it balance. They were wronged, he said, carving symbols into the bark of the baobab tree. And they found each other again. Blood cannot be buried without voice. And voice will always rise. People still speak of the 2 girls who walk at dawn. Never fully seen. Never fully heard. But always there. Sometimes someone finds twin footprints in the wet soil by the river, walking side by side and disappearing into nothing. Others hear laughter, not cruel but soft, like sisters chasing birds through mist. And the old ones still whisper the legend of the twins of thunder, of 2 hearts buried in one coffin, of knocks from beneath the earth, and of justice, patient as rain, returning to walk among the living. You said. In the seasons that followed the final knocking, the village of Itango changed, not with thunder or fire, but with a slow hush, like breath held in reverence. It was not just fear that transformed them. It was the knowledge that the earth remembered, that graves do not always sleep, and that wrongs, even those sealed in silence, will claw their way to daylight. No twins were ever buried together again. In fact, no twin was buried at all. The elders gathered, and after long nights of debate, they crafted a new rite, the twin fire ceremony. When one twin died, 2 fires would be lit. One for the soul departing, one for the soul remaining. The smoke would rise in tandem, so the spirits would see one another and walk side by side, even as one crossed the veil. Ash from both flames would be scattered to the river, and only then would the village grieve. It was said the flames knew how to speak in pairs. And as for the coffin, no one dared build with ebony again. The tree, once a symbol of prestige, its wood used for the honored dead, grew crooked and strange in the wake of that tale. The largest of them, the one from which the twin coffin had been carved, began to bleed. At first it was just a dark ooze seeping from a scar in its bark. But the sap thickened, deepened, turned a crimson so vivid it looked like fresh blood. The villagers swore it smelled like earth after rain, tinged with sorrow. Birds would not perch on its branches. Goats would not graze near its roots. Old Mshale named it the grieving tree. He marked its trunk with twin spirals and warned the children never to climb it. It remembers, he said simply, and it weeps still. Over time stories rose like mist. Children began waking in the night with the same words on their lips. Never bury one when 2 were born. Some called them dreams. Others called them warnings. And a few, like the quiet boy Tembo, born under the same thunderstorm season as the twins, began speaking in riddles not taught by anyone. He claimed to see two girls dancing in the fields, hand in hand, always smiling, always fading before he could call them. He wasn't alone. Over the years, villagers reported soft voices in the wind, gentle humming behind closed doors, a second shadow flickering at dusk. It never stayed, never lingered, but it reminded them, always reminded them. And so the tale lived. No longer a mere whisper from elders' lips, but etched into the bones of the village, painted on the ceremonial drums, burned into the underside of stools passed down through generations. The story of the twins, of love that refused death, of betrayal that did not stay buried, of justice that knocked, twice. And still, on certain nights when the moon sits low and red on the edge of the sky, the villagers gather around the fire pit. The new elder, grizzled with time and wisdom, takes his seat. Children, both wide-eyed and skeptical, huddle close, leaning into the shadows between flame and smoke. The elder's voice cracks like dry bark as he begins. This is not a tale for the faint-hearted, it is a tale with two hearts in one grave. He tells of Nyambura and her twin daughters, of Kanga the Shadow Walker, of the coffin carved from cursed wood, and the knocks that rose from silence like a song that would not be forgotten. He ends it the way it was always ended, by staring deep into the embers, his eyes catching the last flicker of flame. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, he says, "And if you hear knocking at your door, make sure it's not from under your floor." And somewhere, far away, beneath the grieving tree or along the river bend, two shadows pass gently through the fog, side by side, never apart again. The fire had burned low, embers pulsing like a sleeping heartbeat beneath a blanket of ash. The children sat in silence, heavy with the weight of the tale. The elder, his story told, let the stillness linger, letting the final words echo in their minds like distant thunder. Then from the far side of the circle, a child's voice broke the hush. Small, curious. But, did they ever open the coffin again? The elder's back was turned, his cloak catching the firelight like the edge of a storm cloud. He paused, not turning fully but enough for the glow to catch the dark gleam in his eye. The silence returned for a breath too. Then he answered, voice dry and cold as old stone. Some coffins are not meant to be opened, until you're inside. A shiver rippled through the circle. Even the flames seemed to shrink. He stepped away from the fire, cane tapping the ground like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. The shadows welcomed him. The wind picked up, cooler now, threading through the trees like whispered warnings. Then from deep within the forest came a sound. Knock. Oh. Hollow. Measured. The children did not speak, but they listened.